Dr. Jennifer Mata. Welcome back to another educational video. This video is going to focus on how to improve literacy outcomes for newcomers. So let's get into it. So first I wanted to start off by defining what newcomers is. So what does that term mean? Who are we talking about when we're talking about newcomers? Newcomers are students that come into our educational system from other countries. So there are students' families that have immigrated into the U.S. and are now part of our educational system. Typically, their native language is not English. And they've been here in the educational system or in the country for a few months. So their proficiency in English is almost non-existent. So they're students that have not been exposed to the English language, yet are enrolled in public schools, and teachers who are not necessarily bilingual teachers or do not necessarily know much about the student's native language are needing to teach these children. So there's a couple things that we can do, that we can focus on when we're working on this population, and I have 8 tips that I want to share with you. Okay, so tip number 1. Your number 1 priority is going to be focused on enhancing or augmenting vocabulary for these students. So the quicker they gain vocabulary in English, the quicker they're going to be proficient in English. And when I say proficient, I'm focusing more so on social English than academic English. So when we look at the research, we have seen that children gain academic English in a longer period of time than they do social English. So social English typically is acquired between 3 months and 3 years, with a mean of a year or so, right? So for the average student, the average newcomer student that comes to the U.S., we can expect that about in a year's time of being in an English-speaking environment, an English-speaking school, and surrounded by an English-speaking culture, they will gain social English in about a year. Academic English is different. Academic English is going to take anywhere from 5 to 7 years. And what do we mean by academic English? Academic English is the one that is acquired to be able to comprehend between 80 and 100% of what is of an academic text, or of what is being communicated by a teacher or an educator in an academic environment. So students are not going to get to that level of proficiency in their first year of school. But what we can do as educators is focus on developing their vocabulary in English. So explaining every single word that we introduce that is new, that might be new for our students, and for newcomers, all the words are going to be new to them. Explain every word, define it, and give examples. Use it in sentences. Provide props to support those words that are being introduced. Examples, illustrations, photographs, 3D objects that all can be pointed at, so that the student can make a connection between how we say that word in English for that particular object that we're talking about, or action, or feeling, or emotion. So define all the words that you use, using props to associate the oral word with a written word with the actual object, or a representation of that object if you're using images or photographs. That way the student can make connections, because more likely than not, they already know that word in their native language, and they just have to make a connection of, okay, I know this object, I know what this object is called in my native language, and now I'm learning how this object is called in English, in my second language. So augment vocabulary, and vocabulary augmentation is going to be one of your main foci, your main goal for helping newcomers incorporate themselves into your classroom. So tip number 2 is going to be to pair your newcomer student with a student that is fluent in English, but that also might know the newcomer's native language. So this is going to help the student first make a connection with someone that speaks their native language, which is going to be really important for their social and emotional development, but also is going to help this student with comprehension, because the student that is fluent in both languages, or the student that is bilingual, both in English and in the native language of the newcomer, is going to help the newcomer comprehend what's going on in the classroom. Because he might be picking up on these vocabulary words, but not every single word that is enunciated is going to be illustrated, right? So the newcomer might be lost in whatever percentage of the information that is being conveyed. So pairing the newcomer with a student that is bilingual, that is proficient in both the native language of the newcomer and in English, is going to be of great help. So if you have students in your classroom that are bilingual, ask them to work together, to work in pairs with the newcomer student. Tip number 3, story time is going to be paramount. So during story time, you're going to be able to introduce new vocabulary words to model for your newcomer students how the intonation of the words in English is produced. You're going to model for them reading, and you're going to give them examples of writing that they can follow along with, right? So you also want to include interactive kinds of story times. You want to have chorus readings where students repeat what you say and read after you. And this is going to be really important because you don't want to single out newcomers that are not very, they don't feel very secure in their ability to read out loud. So you'll have them read as a chorus with all the other children. As you read, they might repeat, and you can do chorus readings. Guided reading or paired readings, or and while doing guided reading and pairing reading, identify key words and define them for students. So if there's a word in a sentence that is a little more abstract, or it's a new word, a new vocabulary word, always define it for the student. And this is going to be useful for newcomers, and it's going to be useful for all the students in the class. Okay. Tip number 4, for silent reading, which is another type of reading that we do in classrooms, you can ask the newcomer to read in their native language. So have books in the native language of the newcomer, and while students are doing periods of silent reading, and you have the majority of your students reading in English because that's either their native language or the language of instruction, have the newcomer students be reading in their native language. This way they're going to be further developing and maintaining their reading skills in their native language. As vocabulary is being increased, these skills that they develop in their native language can be then transferred over into English. So once they have the vocabulary, they will already know how to read because they've already been practicing this and learning those skills in their native language. Tip number 5, use total physical response. So total physical response is a strategy in which we pair a body movement with the word. And you can use this, and we call it TPR for short. You can use TPR while you introduce new vocabulary, but you can also use it to accompany words or commands that are used frequently in the classroom. But there's some caveats with TPR. TPR is a whole technique that you can learn and really go in depth with. So mainly what you're doing is you're reinforcing comprehension by pairing a body movement to a word. So for example, if you say throw, you're going to accompany the word throw with the movement of throwing. So the movement that accompanies the word has to elicit, to some extent, the definition of the word. So it wouldn't be the same if I say throw and I tap my head, and throw and I tap my head. There's a body movement associated with the word, but the body movement doesn't really say anything about what the word means, or the body movement really is conveying a different kind of movement that that word is trying to, or is actually conveying, right? So when you say throw, you want to mimic the movement of throw. When you say tap, you might want to say tap and tap your head, right? And throw and use your arm as in the throwing movement. And we do this because the movement that we use associated to the word expands the definition of that particular word or phrase that we are trying to teach to the student. So it's supposed to augment comprehension. There's some caveats though to TPR, and as I said before, it's a more in-depth technique, but you have to be very consistent and always use the same movement with the same word, as well as always that the word is enunciated, do the movement that accompanies that word. So not do it inconsistently, like sometimes you say the word and you do the movement, and sometimes you say the word and you don't do the movement. You have to be very conscious of when you're saying the word that has a movement attached to it to say the word and accompany it by the movement. You have to be very consistent, very diligent in using this method for it to be effective for children. Okay, tip number 6 is that in whole group activities, you want to be very conscientious of not calling out students to provide answers in an individual kind of way. Instead of calling out the student and asking them to provide the answer to the question that you're asking, use activities like pair and share, where students have to turn around, talk to the buddy, the friend that they're sitting next to, discuss the idea, and then share out the response to the question or the prompt that the teacher has asked. You can do that in small groups of 3. You can do it just in pairs with the student that is right next to you. You can have the student, if you have identified that student that is proficient in both the native language of the newcomer and English, pair that student with the newcomer in those kinds of activities. Okay, tip number 7 is to have fun. So there's a lot of games online that can be used to promote vocabulary. Okay, remember that tip number 1 is to focus on vocabulary augmentation. What you want to provide that augmentation is in the funnest way possible. And so Noodle has a lot of videos that can be shown in the classroom, that can be, if you're doing online learning, that can be just portrayed through the settings by sharing your screen and show it to the students, to all the students that are in that virtual learning space. And if you're in a regular classroom, you can always project it and from the computer onto the wall or onto the smart board and have all students participate. They love these kinds of activities. It involves all the senses. You have a visual stimuli from the video, you have an auditory stimuli from the audio that's coming from the video, and then you have movement and kinesthetic stimuli by the students getting up and following the activities that are being prompted by the video that they're watching. So you have all these stimuli coming in, and more often than not, those kinds of repetitive video kind of activities are going to help the student gain and augment their vocabulary. The last tip, tip 8, is to play games. So if you don't have access to technology and computers, and there are a lot of games that you can design by yourself, like the old-fashioned kind of games. You can do bingo with different words or different letters and call them out and have the student look for them in their bingo charts. You can do play Scrabble, you can play Pictionary, you can play Simon Says, or you can play charades. When I was little, we played a game called the Hangman. I don't know if that is played still or if it is even politically correct to play the Hangman, but you can play Complete the Picture instead of the Hangman, and have a picture every time the student guesses one of the letters of the phrase or the word, an aspect of the picture comes up. And if the picture is completed, then before the word is guessed, then there's no winning, right? But if the word is guessed before the picture is completed, then it's like you guessed what the picture was before you got all the hints or all the clues to identify what the picture was. So that's it. Those are 8 tips that you can do with newcomers to help them improve their literacy outcomes. And remember that your main goal of all these tips and what all of these different tips are going to help you to do is to increase vocabulary. Because by increasing or augmenting vocabulary, you're going to help the children go a long ways in their English language proficiency and also in their literacy outcomes. So I hope you liked it and learned something with this video, and I will see you again next time. Bye.